Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name's Jeff Thomas, and we have a couple of special guests with us today. My co-host today is Cale, one of my colleagues, the COO of Arcos. Say hello to the people, Cale.
Howdy, everyone from Texas.
And so, yes, Cale and I are coming to you from Houston, Texas, and from Atlanta, Georgia. Chris Carneal is with us. He is the founder and CEO of Booster. If you don't already know, you'll know by the end of this podcast what that company does. But Chris, welcome to the program.
Get fired up and thank you.
Yeah, you're in for a great ride with Chris. He's got an amazing story. He and Cale have known each other for a long time. I am a fan of the company. They have an amazing story. And let's just start, Chris, where we always do, with tell us about your family growing up, where you grew up, all that kind of thing.
Jeff, I love that you're doing this. Listen to your podcast. I'm a consumer of it and a fan of it and really honored to be on it. You got a great tribe. I feel like I'm part of it. So thanks for your generous work to spread awesome stories and ideas that inspire all. I'm originally from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, sunny South Florida, where it's cold about 3 days a year. I was an only child. My parents were divorced, but both extremely actively involved in my life growing up. My mom was a college professor. My dad was an attorney. I have been a person of faith as long as I can remember. Obviously a divorced home, but also in many ways, very healthy community around me. Very positive, optimistic, encouraging mom and parents, and a very involved dad, and love playing baseball. So I got the only child, two parents with a focus on one. Got to play a lot of baseball, a lot of good friends, and still lots of family and community down there. And super involved in my church and youth group, and loved all kinds of activities, sporting events, and doing all that. Went to college in Birmingham, Alabama at Samford University. I was a religion major. Never had a business class, though I'm a founder and CEO of a company. I don't want to jinx it. So, but I have my master's degree in theology, went on to seminary actually after college. Met my wife in 8th grade. Her locker was next to mine. No, we're not childhood sweethearts. I wish we were. I had to chase her for about 5 or 6 years till she gave me the time of day. But here we are now. We've been married for 22 years. I'm a father of 4, 2 girls and 2 boys. My oldest daughter goes to college at Liberty University in 6 months. So I got 194 days with her still in my roof, with the whole family there in the wonder years, as we call it. Not that I'm counting the days. Coach my boys at baseball, and life is good. I'm extremely blessed. Run a company in Atlanta. If anybody's into personality tests, I'm a ENFP Myers-Briggs. I'm a 7 with an 8 wing on the Enneagram. That might not mean anything, or it could be super helpful. Either way, it definitely means I'm probably going to be distracted a few times during this podcast. So keep me on track.
Exactly. Well, that's fantastic. Do you have any siblings, just out of curiosity?
Only child, but parents got remarried. So some step siblings that I'm pretty close with.
Gotcha. Very good. And then did you have some kind of entrepreneurial bent growing up? I mean, it's so interesting that you studied kind of religion and theology, because I sort of just think of you as such a pure entrepreneur, but maybe that's off base. Did you have those leanings as a kid? No,
you're jumping right to my heart and soul. Looking back now as a 43-year-old, I have always had an entrepreneurial bent. Didn't necessarily call it that at the time. Loved out of the box ideas, loved selling things. I would go to the grocery store after Christmas and buy candy canes at 90% off and then sell them at price, get in trouble at school. I'd buy fireworks driving through Tennessee and sell it to friends. I was always looking for opportunities to do things like I love sales. I love new big ideas. I'll tell you what, though, I don't know if anybody of your listeners resonate with this. I'm sure a lot will. I thought, again, I'm 43. So growing up in the 80s and 90s and going to church most Sundays and being around the really faith-driven religious community, I never heard a sermon that explicitly said this, but here's the grand narrative I heard growing up in my head that took me probably 20 years to deprogram. Hey, you want to change the world? Work for a nonprofit.
Yep.
You want to make money? Go work for a for-profit. And if you want to change the world and you're in the for-profit business, well, make some and give some. And that's about it. And of course, we're on the Generous Business Owner podcast. So yes to generosity. However, making and giving is not the only thing you can do in your 100,000 hours of vocational work in your life. So I'm extremely passionate about using your Tuesday meeting for kingdom purposes, the good of others, for human flourishing, just as much as maybe your Sunday or your service hours as well. So it took a long time for those things to come together. The reason I was a religion major and went to seminary for 3 years is I thought I needed to work at a church, or even my solution to the entrepreneurial world-changing tension was I'll start a church so I can create something, but it'll still be in the nonprofit world. And that's the biggest way I could change the world, which is wonderful to everyone that does that. But it neglects about 95% of the for-profit commerce leaders, and it really degrades their thinking in the sacred versus secular, which of course doesn't exist. All things, in my opinion, are sacred if we're doing it with the right reason, on purpose, for a purpose.
Well, I think you're right on the money. Mm-hmm. I definitely talked about that in my book. I had that, what I call stinking thinking as well. And I think some of it for me was about, I had a guy, my dad was a business guy who became a pastor. So I was like, well, I guess if you're all in for God,
you got to make the jump.
They would talk about being called to ministry, right, as a term to go to the church or, be a missionary or something. And so I
hear that term used still every week, still yes. Today. Not as often, thank goodness. I hope our kids never use it.
No, exactly. And so we're all called to ministry, yes, is the point.
Yep.
And then I always think about Billy Graham, right? The next big move of God, he said he thought would be in the workplace, and I think that was prophetic. So, and by the way, it was never supposed to not be in the workplace, right?
If you study world history, the idea of a nonprofit is a very Western, very modern concept, and it's wonderful. And we're so blessed by so many. I'm not knocking it at all, but for the majority of the world, if you were a Christ follower or a do-gooder in whatever form, you just had to do that in your daily life.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. Now let's get into this thing. I don't think you've been a big job hopper, and so I'm going to ask you to kind of start the booster story or how you got into that, and then I'm going to let Cale kind of take us through all these different components and the journey of Booster over the years, and because full disclosure, Cale's wife works for Booster. So we were joking.
He's one of our best, for the record, one of our best.
There you go. Shout out to her. And
yep.
So maybe talk, how did you get into this business to begin with? I hear about a famous story in the back of a truck with a megaphone. Is that how it all began?
Well, getting into business is a great reverse engineering of the story. Everyone, as you get older, you tell stories, and I hear entrepreneurs. I'm like, that's not how it happened. You didn't have a clue. You tried an idea. There was no product market fit. I didn't know what any of these terms meant. I had no idea. So take your preconceived notion of what Chris, the CEO, is now or should have been then, and it's. I was a religion major. I was 21 years old. I played college baseball, and then when my baseball career was over, my last 2 years of college, I did baseball lessons for kids, one-on-one lessons. Meet you at the park, pay me $30, and I'll teach you how to throw. And then I realized I had a platform to these students. I was 20, they were 9. So, hey, let's talk about attitude and hard work and character. And I realized very quickly the parents loved it. They told everyone they knew, hey, my kid is hitting, and he used to not hit, but he's also a better teammate. You got to talk to this guy, Chris. So it started to grow. I loved growth of, we'll call it a business, all sports tutoring, my college gig. I loved it. I had so many students, I couldn't tutor them all. So I started hiring team members, and then that branched into other sports, track and softball, and other friends of mine from college in the afternoon after class. I had about 300 students and about 10 employees as a 21-year-old. And I loved it. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm making money. I'm growing. This is a challenge. It's fun. It's scratching all the entrepreneurial itches, and I'm making a difference. I'm encouraging these kids. I'm helping at the soft skills and the hard skills of what they're doing. The community in some ways is better because of what we do. So that was the first insight into the idea of a missional business, though I did not use those terms, and we certainly weren't quite a business. But along the way, one of those students, Carter Gannon, fifth grader, before a baseball lesson said, "Before we start, Coach, would you like to buy some magazines for my school fundraiser?" And I thought, at least in business terms today, there's been no product evolution and innovation in the past 15 years since I was in your shoes. I don't want to buy a product. Who does? So when I was in elementary school, I had the opportunity through our PE coach and my dad, who helped organize with our school's booster club, a fitness fun run. So I ran in a really fun event that also morphed into a fundraiser. Called my dad after the baseball lesson, called my mom, the college educator, tell me what teachers do, what do schools do, and found out that the majority of school fundraising was magazine sales or some sort of kind of junky product. And the concept was, well, running's not original and fun's not original, but if I combine those two with kind of a heart for service, I'll do it for you, I'll organize, promote, encourage, and communicate on your behalf so that educators could educate and not be campaign promoters of a program. And I'd worked with students and youth and children and events and summer camps. And so that was pretty easy for me. It's not easy necessarily for those that don't do it. So the idea was born that let's take this concept of donation-based pledges for the number of laps run. That was the initial light bulb moment.
Man, I love that story, Chris. Thanks for sharing that. And you got to tell, I mean, one of my favorites, and I don't want to spoil it, but talk about how hard it was getting that off the ground, like how many principals you had to go see. And then one of the things I love is the guy that said, yes, there's something y'all do like on a consistent basis every year. So maybe share a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll probably forward this podcast to him and say, thank you again. So, it wasn't hard in the sense of like, my family's got to eat. That was a few years later. Or I have employees and payroll to make. That was a few years later. It was like, I'm in college. This is a fun challenge. Can I? And I knew that it would work. I knew it. So I went around literally to 50 schools, and went around was, hey, I'm in college. I've never done this before. I got a concept that you adults should trust me with, and it involves your money and your kids. And did I tell you I've never done it before? But as a kid, I kind of did a fun run, and I've seen it done, and some schools do it, but I can do it better. Everyone was so gracious. Man, love your enthusiasm. Got a lot of energy. Sounds like you got a good work ethic. Once you've done this a few times, let me know. I'd be happy to try it. So if any entrepreneurs are out there, listen, all you need is one client. All you need is one. You might have to go through 50 or 500, but you only need one. And then once you get the one, there's no longer the first and that emotional hurdle. Like, how do I get it? So I learned so much. I finally got one school. I'd gone back to them 3 times. I bumped into their athletic director at a baseball game. I'd helped coach part of their basketball team. Just kept bumping into him. Bill Wilder is his name, and I know it very well. I see him every few years. I invited him to our Booster 20th celebration and honored him a couple years ago. But I call him every August 15th at the start of the fall semester, and every April 15th at the start or in the middle of the spring semester when our very first program kicked off in 2002. So twice a year, I've called him 43 times now. And I say, Coach, I just want to thank you. We currently have 900 employees. This year we'll do 100 million in revenue. And we've raised schools $750 million in school profit. And if you did not say yes and give me the chance and take a risk and be generous with the opportunity, none of that would have existed. So I'm loyal, grateful to my first ever client, and any entrepreneur listening gets that emotional connection.
I love that. I mean, that's like, kind of the proverbial, like, that's my first dollar, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah. Yep.
And I think the way that you celebrate that, Chris, just is such a testament. It's one of the things I see through my wife that Booster does so well is celebration. And to me, that's a component of generosity, right? Like nurturing and celebrating a culture costs money, right? Yep. I mean, that's part of your P&L. So, I mean, how did that start, right? Like Booster early days, what did that look like, for the aspiring new entrepreneur there? And then like, what does that mature component look like? Maybe share a little bit about that, because you got from, $0 to 100 million in revenue, 1 employee to 900 employees. It's a big gap, in 20 years.
Yeah. As an Enneagram 7 and a Myers-Briggs ENFP, the idea of celebration comes very naturally. So some are hearing this and like, I love to celebrate. Permission to do it at work? Yes. Some of you are like, what is celebration? I just got to get some work done. That's okay. I do think that if we're talking to a faith audience, Luke 15, the word celebrate, at least the English translation, is used 3 times to describe the father, who is the hero of the prodigal son's story. It's called the prodigal son. It's not about him. It's really about the father, his love, his grace, his mercy, his open arms, his welcoming home. And 3 times it says the father celebrated. And so I want to be like my heavenly father. I'm an earthly father. And there's few reactions that are more emotionally connecting, that are more memorable, that evoke the best in us and others than a well-done, others-centered celebration. And this world hears celebration, and often we think it's celebrate myself, or it's all about me. No. We're talking about true others-centered celebration, where someone else is the center of the story and the center of the map, and it's about them. And let's go a little above and beyond. If you ever come to our office in Atlanta, I'd love to welcome you, literally with confetti cannons and smoke machines and a tunnel where you'll run through and give high fives. And at least in 30 seconds on your first day of work or first visit, you will feel celebrated. And it's amazing now how I bumped into someone this morning. You got to go by his office. Like, when were you there? I was there 8 years ago. Like, we've been friends for 8 years. The only thing you remember is the 30-second celebrations. So celebrations are, I think, a great component to life. They're one of the, when you look back at your year, like we're just started 2024, but look back at 2023. What'd you do October 3rd? You don't know. What'd you do on a Saturday in June? You don't know. You probably remember like 5 events, and I'll bet there's some celebratory moment that connects those to your mind and your heart and your soul. So celebration is one of our 6 virtues. It's also what we have the opportunity to do on school campuses, and to celebrate students and to celebrate teachers. And so never miss a moment to celebrate. It's part of affirmation. It's part of encouragement. It's part of acknowledgement. People want to be seen. They want to feel a sense of belonging. They want to be heard. And celebration is kind of the icing on the cake of all of those basic of human interactions.
Man, I love that. And celebration is so huge. And man, Chris, you're probably one of the best at it, I think, that I've ever met. And we get to learn from, amazing people out there that are also doing it well. So thanks for your, commitment to that. And I love how you've connected that to your virtues. My guess is day one, while the spirit was there, you maybe didn't have it all defined with your 6 virtues. Talk about maybe that journey of like getting from, kind of the impetus of Booster to where you are now.
Well, yeah, I'll connect that to your earlier question that I forgot to answer and just remembered how I got started and I forgot where you were going.
I'll forgive you.
I think we were a year and a half in. I had like 6 employees. They were all guys. I think I might have been the only married one. I hired a couple college friends and teammates, and hey, the semester's over. Wow, that was amazing. A lot of hard work. It's June. Let's go play. I remember driving to South Carolina, having 2 days to just goof around and play. And the last day was kind of cast vision for the future. I remember we played paintball all day. And I'm like, I got to give everybody a gift. I want to rent paintball guns. Everybody gets their own paintball gun.
Yeah.
Like 23-year-old, 25-year-old guys doing it. But the fact that I gave them a gun, and I bought them a uniform, I custom made a couple things. Yeah. The point was not just a gift. It was generous, yes, but it was under the umbrella of celebration. Mm-hmm. That was the first semester celebration. Then I remember about 6 months later at the end of the fall semester thinking, okay, how do we do that again? I probably should think about a budget. How many people are there? You know what I love that feels easy and fun and doable? At the time, I think we had 40 team members maybe. This is 2007, 6. Our first ever booster cruise. At the time, I said, just figure out a way. Let's all drive to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, my hometown, stayed a night with my parents, and then got on a cruise for a couple of days and celebrated the work that we just finished. And that kind of began the ethos of, we do all kinds of things now, but of like, how can we find a way to celebrate the right things, the right person, and the right activities? And a phrase I use culturally that hopefully will stick in your mind that's been huge for me is, what gets celebrated gets reproduced. Mm. What's tolerated is reproduced as well, culturally. So we need to not tolerate some things we don't want to take hold of. But nothing is stickier. Nothing becomes part of your culture more than what gets celebrated. So it's I'll just jump to super practical. This is like a new concept for you. I don't want to patronize anybody. Most of you, I'm sure, are already doing this. I'd love to learn from you. But who do I want to reproduce, and what activity and action do I want to reproduce? Am I celebrating that person and that action? So I want my salespeople to sell more. Well, do you do anything when they do? You ring a bell or give them a phone call or send them a text. Or today we signed up 3 new schools.
Yeah.
I'm off a lot of emails that I used to be on, but I'm not off the new client addition emails. And I reply to everyone, reply all. Congratulations, Lynn. Proud of your hard work. I just want them in that moment to be seen, acknowledged. Yep. Wow, the founder still knows. And hopefully they feel celebrated. So there's lots of ways to celebrate. I would encourage whoever's listening, put your own spin on it. I mean, write a note, send a call, give a gift, whatever you like your love language is, great. Make it you, ingrain it into your culture. But the principle of celebration works for all time in every country, in every context, if you do it, if you celebrate the right person for the right reason.
I love that. And such a, I mean, I can see it as a husband, right? I mean, my wife has gotten a text from you, Chris, of new business close or whatever. And, if it's 40 employees, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but 900, that's something that's an effort, that's a generosity on your behalf to put that into practice. And man, you've got a ton to celebrate with going from, a fledgling startup with yourself or maybe 6 people to 900 employees, 750 million school profit of funds raised. That's huge. But I can't imagine the ride's been, just up and to the right with no obstacles. Maybe tell us about a setback or a hardship that's come along the way that y'all had to overcome and what that was like when it wasn't maybe so, didn't feel maybe so much to celebrate in the moment.
Yes. Well, 22 years of being a founder, entrepreneurial CEO, we could spend a series of setbacks and challenges. Could record 100 podcasts from disappointments to rejections to competition to lawsuits to recessions. Forces that we can control and can't control. The most recent and probably the most glaring, and the one that I'm going to include a chapter on in my a book that I've just begun writing, is the COVID season. Everyone was impacted by COVID. So zoom back in time, less than 4 years ago, March the 13th, 2020, I was planning on turning 40, going on a trip to Europe with family and friends. We were planning on a banner year and all kinds of new celebrations and new hires. And I started an internal incubator called Launchpad for new ideas. We had extra margin to potentially acquire or start new companies. Things are up and to the right like they'd never been. And man, this is how it's going to be. All that stuff's gone and done and challenges. And now it's sunny days ahead. And then I remember the first week of March, the last week of February, telling my CFO, the first country in the world, if anybody remembers, that closed their school system was Japan. And I said, this is weird. They closed the whole school system for probably a few days or a week. Let's just run a scenario if we were to close. And of course, the consensus was, well, a state might close, a school system might close, but Japan's a small country. America's diversified in 50 states and different points of view and red and blue and everything in between. And they certainly won't close. Well, we ran the scenario of what if the whole country's closed for 2 weeks? Well, then on March the 13th, Friday the 13th, began 2 weeks to slow the curve. 2 weeks. What a bunch of nonsense. If you can hear a little anger in my voice still, it's still there. In my opinion, COVID was real, but the reaction to it, the fear was the true pandemic, was the fear inside the hearts of so many people. There were definite people that were greatly affected health-wise, but the vast majority of young or healthy, to shut down the world was a very, in my opinion, close-minded, short-term vision that all these repercussions won't happen at all. And I'm sure most had good intents. Well, the small businesses that still haven't opened, the displacement, the lack. I mean, we're just now seeing in test scores. I work with schools, the emotional, mental, and educational gap that exists now that did not exist pre-COVID. I don't know if this generation's ever going to be able to catch up. They'll be a year or two behind the world, and we need to work harder to catch up. Anyway, sorry for that rant. Let me tell you how it impacted my company. And at the time, 873 employees, 2 weeks to slow the curve, 2 months to slow the curve. We went 100 173 days with zero revenue. Now, that's tough to do when I was a 20-year-old living in my college dorm, even eating ramen noodles. It was much tougher with 873 employees burning $100,000 a day and losing 20 million in revenue immediately, and then trying to figure out what are we going to do. At the time, by the way, we were over 500 employees, which meant we were ineligible to get PPP.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried as best as possible to protect paychecks as long as possible, thinking, okay, summer's coming. Well, that stinks. The 10 years we've worked hard and saved for and built our balance sheet, that's gone. But hey, we survived, and the fall will be good. Well, in late July, in the middle of our training week, we realized they're closing schools in conservative red states for the fall and pushing them back. So that was the toughest moment for me. Very long 6 months, trust in the Lord. Can't control this. Owner, founder, CEOs like to control things, don't we? So, man, to have the mindset that I'm not in control. It's not my ship. I'm a steward. I'm not the captain. I'm going along for the ride. The Lord's the captain. This is the journey I'm on. For whatever reason, it'll hopefully draw me closer to him, and it'll be good for me one day. But boy, it sure hurts in the moment. So we finally had to right-size the company when we had 30 days of cash left after having gone 170, at the time, 150-ish. And we had to go from 873 employees to 143. And so cutting 85% of our workforce, who is my mission and passion and culture and friends. I'm not the typical buy it, sell it, flip it entrepreneur. I mean, my people are my mission. So it was extremely hard for me and extremely hard for everyone that was cut and everyone that wasn't cut. It was just the business decision we had to do to save the organization.
Yeah.
And so that was challenging. I can go to lots of details around it. Our goal at the end was we were planning on a $50 million fall revenue, fall 2020. 50 was the plan pre-COVID. The prayer became 5 to survive.
Wow.
And 10 to win.
Yeah.
And by God's grace and a really scrappy, awesome, customer-centric team, we ended up with 13 million in revenue. It's amazing when your expectations are 5 and you hit 13, you're overjoyed. Where 6 months prior it was 50.
Yeah.
So, we did what we had to do. I'm so proud of my team that stuck with me. So grateful for those that I couldn't keep. And now we've hired back. We now have 900 team members, and 85% of our team was not with us pre-COVID just about 3 years ago. So rebuilding, growth pains we're currently having, but they're better than dying pains, which we were having a few years ago.
Well, I have to imagine with that, I mean, you probably had all sorts of people in your ear, whether that's advisors, internal to your business, external business. I mean, conversations with your wife, the fear. I mean, did it ever cross your mind? Like, were people trying to convince you, like, just close the doors or just sell it? Or, like, how did you mentally weather that storm? Like what would be one piece of advice to the entrepreneur out there that's maybe going through that?
I'll tell my favorite story. The most important life decision is who you marry. We all know that. And if your spouse is on board with you, it's tough enough in a marriage, an entrepreneurial marriage or a business marriage where like you are carrying the weight, they carry the weight. It comes home. Sure. And that's good and bad. So my CFO calls me in April, Stan, and he says, no one's going to tell you this because they want a paycheck and the world's falling apart, but you got an opportunity. You just turned 40. You got an opportunity to walk away. There's a decent amount of money in the bank and, take a year off and start it back again if you want to. And I said, Stan, I'm not going to do that. We got to fight this thing. He said, listen, this is one of those things you got to take to your wife. You got to pray about, you got to talk about. It's Friday. Don't make a decision until Monday morning. You need to know that that's an option. And it might be the best option for your family and maybe even for the future to say, we're done. Great 20-year run, 19-year run. Let's take a break. Let's come back maybe or not. So I said, babe, this was Saturday morning. We'd sit outside and there's nothing to do, in that season. But my wife and I, we'd sleep in, we'd eat breakfast outside. And I said, hey, Stan wants me to talk to you about this. And she could tell that it was like an awkward nervousness. I said, babe, this isn't going well. And I'm an optimist and I don't know when this 2-month thing is going to ever end. And there's a chance that we don't just lose a little, you can't stop the knife from falling. Like it's it's kind of bankruptcy or go for it. Like, you can't like stop with $1, you know?
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure we're aligned, and I really want to get your wisdom. Should we I don't want to influence you, babe, but just what should we do? Here's her answer candidly on a public podcast. Hell no, we're not giving up. Let's go. We're fighting this thing out.
Yeah.
And you know, if we go bankrupt, we go bankrupt, but that's not our story. We're gonna fight it out and tell the grandkids we went bankrupt for a noble cause. We feel like it's our mission. We feel the Lord gave it to us to steward, and let's fight this thing out. And once I knew that I did not have to fight a 2-front war, then I knew I could give all my attention to fight the 1-front war, which is save the company.
Wow.
And so all that credit goes to my wife, and you know, to entrepreneurs, your spouse is your greatest asset, and listen to them. If she had said it's time to fold, I really would have listened. I'm really glad she didn't.
Man, what an incredible story. And I think it's such a great, you know, in the social media age, it's so easy to see snapshots of like entrepreneurs, right? And we see a snapshot of Chris Carneal, you know, doing all these great things with Booster. And it's easy for like someone else just to go, wow, Chris is crushing it. Must have been an easy ride, whatever. You know, all you're seeing is the now, you know, but the journey, I mean, that's what paints that picture, the highs and the lows to really, that someone listening is maybe going through it right now. And
oh yeah. I was just in my emotions yesterday, but a few short years ago, I was on my knees crying with my kids thinking my whole vision of the future is about to change.
Yeah.
And I know my daughter's a couple of years away from college. I'm not gonna be able to pay for that. And this thing, we got to cancel that trip. And we might have to sell our house. And that was very real, tears and fear and all of it. And, you know, it's those moments that bring us closer to what and who matters most. For me, the Lord and my family and friends. You find out who your true friends are. You find out who really cares. And you rely heavily on the Lord.
Well, thanks for sharing that vulnerable story. And here you are. I mean, the next season of Booster, bigger, better than ever. And what is that, you know, kind of switching topics slightly, but it's connected. Like, what does generosity look like for you guys within the business, even in the storm, but certainly now? Like, how do you double down on that aspiration to be generous with your, you know, as you said, kind of your time, your platform, your relationships?
I love that question. I know that is the theme of this podcast. I love generosity. When I'm surrounded by a generous person, what's the proverb? The generous person will prosper. He who blesses others will he himself be blessed. You know, generosity is a blessing. And our business model in many ways is to inspire generosity in givers and donors. 6 million donors this year gave over $100 million to schools because they're generous. America is an incredibly generous country. Shout out to our country for a second. There's an ethos of America, and there's an ethos of like the American idea of like, how can I help others? And so I think generosity, I believe it's Randy Alcorn's book, The Treasure Principle, that was the first time I saw generosity as time, talent, and treasure. In my mind, it was primarily treasure, which of course is significant, but time, talent, and treasure. So whenever I think through generosity, I think about time, talent, and treasure. And I think it's Peter Drucker that says strategy is trade-offs. So it's this or that. You can only do, you know, no matter how good we are, like our top 5 business initiatives or top 3 family plans, or like you can only do so much. So there's a limited amount of time. So how do I make trade-offs in my time, talent, and treasure for the greatest impact? There's only 24 hours in a day, and there's only so much money, and there's only so much talent that any individual has. So how do I right with courage, properly look at what have I been given? All of life is a gift of grace. I talked about our final virtue of celebration. That's virtue 6. Virtue 1 is gratitude. And to me, that's where generosity begins. All of life. The fact that I was born in 1980 in America, I mean, I just hit the absolute jackpot of life. The fact that I have loving parents, that I now have a loving family, like, wow. In world history, like if you are listening to this podcast, in the history of the world, we are in the top 1% of 1% of 1% in terms of what we have been given. And not just in terms of money or finance or a phone or a Spotify or podcast, but technology and health and nation and country and the wisdom and opportunity. The fact that we could say, hey, Siri, and that'll like answer every question we have. I mean, what a blessing. And so when my heart is full of gratitude, generosity should be an outcome that comes out of it. So I like to think in terms of time, talent, and treasure, in terms of the buckets, and make sure I'm allocating as much time to think about how can I be generous with my time and talent, not just treasure.
This is so good. Chris, thanks for sharing. If people, I can already see the requests, and I'm going to head them off on what the 6 virtues are. Do you mind just ticking them off? And
Sure.
if you've got a link, we'll put it in the show notes, but maybe you can tick them off for us.
Sure. Companies have values. I think values are incredibly important. I am calling and challenging CEOs and entrepreneurs, founders, people of influence, that values do not go far enough. And it's time for a revolution from values to virtues. Just look up the word differences, read a book or 2 on it. I started thinking about our values being in need of refreshment. Words change over time. Definitions change over time. I honestly started to see our values that I could get you fired up about, that I thought were unique, being used all over the place with organizations that didn't embody those values. So I thought, do I add an adjective to them? How do I better define them? And then in my research of this about 4 years ago, I stumbled across the ancient word, the incredible word called virtue, which, here's my distinctive: virtues are more aspirational than values. They're more actionable than values. They're more timeless than values. And they're almost universally approved and celebrated. I mean, so pick your time in world history, pick your country, religion, nationality, political worldview, whatever. Who doesn't believe that courage makes the world a better place, right? So here's our 6. They're in order on purpose. Maybe in other podcasts I can go through how we chose them, why we chose them, but here's the 6: gratitude, wisdom, care, courage, grit, and celebration. They're in that order on a purpose for a reason. We call it the virtuous cycle. They also are as applicable personally as they are professionally. So, hey, in my 40, 50 hours with you this week, or 100,000 vocational hours, hopefully this will help your 200,000 non-vocational hours of your life. So if we give you the opportunity to exhibit, let's say, wisdom in the workplace, hopefully that boardroom wisdom will also translate to the family room wisdom as well. So transferable character traits that are world shaping over time and world history. Those 6 words fully fleshed out, we will never achieve them, but the pursuit of them will make the world a better place.
Chris, that's so fantastic. And you know, it is interesting that you are inspiring generosity with your actual product.
Yes.
That's pretty unique. And then you've got this sort of biblical background, and then this, I mean, I've never heard of anybody doing the kind of things to the level you do to celebrate inside the company. That is a real gift to your team members. So, I mean, this is generosity on all kinds of interesting and new levels. And I know people are loving this. I know I am, in Cale is. So you've also been generous with your time for us. I don't think I've ever come away with more to-dos. Cale does a great job of that, but you know, I need to send more celebratory messages is one of my takeaways. But for other people, and you know, we were talking before we started recording, we always try to leave with a practical tip for somebody behind you on the journey, you know, that maybe they're just starting a business, just starting to take off. Maybe they've been through a trough and maybe it's starting to work, and they're kind of thinking, how do I use this platform in a way that it's a blessing to those around me? You know, maybe take it down. When they wake up tomorrow after hearing this podcast, what's one little thing they could do to get on that path?
Sure. If this comes naturally to the person because of their DNA and the way they're wired, their identity, then they don't need me to answer because they've already got 100 ideas. If it doesn't come naturally, there's a good chance it comes naturally to someone on their team or in their orbit or on their most used text chain. So wisdom is asking for help. Guys, I want to start celebrating my people more. I'm just pull out your phone. Who'd you just text? Who's your like fun hangout text chain group of people? I want to celebrate my team more. Can you help me? Can we grab coffee and you can help me? Can we do a 30-minute brainstorm? Or what are the best celebrations? What celebrations have you seen organizations do that make you feel valued? How have you best been celebrated? I mean, 5 or 6 tests, one or two coffees, maybe even like, hey, junior level, just started team member, this just comes natural to you. You're going to lead our celebration task force. We're going to meet once a month for 45 minutes. You're going to give me 3 different ideas on ways we can celebrate. I also want you to be really observant and curious. Not everybody wants to be celebrated the same way. The super introvert might not want the confetti can and the microphone in the spotlight, but the high extrovert might. Some would want a written note. Some would want, verbal. Some might want, I'll tell you what I do. I've learned to do more often, even than text. When I find good news that I just want to spread, half the time, like I'll pull into my driveway, I'll get a text before I walk into the house. This person hit this goal. Like we just hired a new person. Everything can be celebrated that's with the right intention. Thank you for coming to our company, right? Day one. Anyway, I film a 15-second video on my phone, and my team will send me at least 3 or 4 a week. Like, Johnny just started. Sally just hit this goal. Hey, this is Chris. I just heard from Kim. You hit an amazing goal. I want to tell you how important that is. I can't wait to meet you in person. Here's how it connects to our mission. And so then, one, they got it. They can watch it at their convenience. It's not like the intimidating CEO call they got to answer in the middle of the meeting. And then 3, they can share it with family, friends, spouse, and keep it. So it's kind of a 15-second video could be a reminder for the next 10 years. That's easy. I'll tell you what I do that's cheap, that is super fun. Just one more practical I was thinking of a minute ago. So generosity is about what you have to give. I'll bet the majority of listeners to this podcast are learners, and I bet they love to read. What is your favorite book? Buy 10 copies. And anytime someone comes in your office or a new employee starts, or just send them, hand them the book. I write notes in the front of books. Happy birthday. This is my favorite book. I hope you enjoy it. I mean, giving away a $12, $15, $20 book is a great way to be generous. And what are you doing? You're promoting the conversation that impacted you to others. So small things can make a huge difference.
The vision that came to me is so good when you were talking about that was how angels in heaven rejoice when they see us do awesome things around God. And it's like, so that principle of celebrating each other, I think that is a mirror image of the way God celebrates us. And he's like, when we get it right every once in a while. So
well, and to go even one further, final gospel step, the way the Father celebrates his son, Jesus, who was perfect, is the way he celebrates us, regardless of what we do in our accomplishments.
Yeah.
That's it. Rest in that.
Amen. Well, Chris, we can't thank you enough. Cale, thanks for being with us today. And it was super helpful. And Chris, just again, thanks for being with us and sharing your journey. I know it's going to be, just a real asset to many people. So thanks so much, and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks for the opportunity, guys. God bless you. Go change the world.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining this week's Generous Business Owner podcast. Share it with your friends and family, and sign up for our newsletter at generousbusinessowner.com, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.